The child was 7 years old when she watched her mother die in childbirth. Blood soaked through the straw mattress. The midwife had done what she could, but infection set in fast. 3 days of fever, then silence. No funeral, no time to grieve. The father remarried within 2 months because the household needed a woman to work. The new wife brought her own children. That meant less food, less space, less of everything. By age 9, the girl was gone. Not kidnapped, not running away, sold. Her father called it an apprenticeship. The man who took her called it an investment. She would work in his house now. She would learn a trade, he said. But first, she would learn what it meant to be powerless. The door closed behind her. She never saw her family again. This was England in the early 1600s. It was a time when women had almost no rights and even fewer choices. A woman could not own property. She could not vote. She could not leave a marriage. If her husband beat her, the law did nothing. If he killed her, he might only pay a fine. Women were considered the property of their fathers first, then their husbands. A girl's worth was measured by how much work she could do or how much money her marriage could bring. The country was filthy. Streets ran with sewage. Disease spread fast. Smallpox scarred faces. Plague killed entire families. Most people never traveled more than 10 miles from where they were born. The class system was rigid. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born a woman, your life was even harder. This was not a world of romance or adventure. It was a world of survival. And for young women with no family and no money, survival meant becoming a servant. Her name was Anne, or at least that is what we will call her. Records from that time did not care much about names of poor girls. She was 10 years old when she began working in the household of a wool merchant in London. The house was large, cold, and always busy. Anne was the lowest in the hierarchy, below the cook, below the other maids. She slept in the attic with 2 other girls on a shared straw pallet. They had one blanket between them. In winter, their breath frosted in the air. Her day began before sunrise. She was responsible for emptying chamber pots, scrubbing floors, hauling water from the well, and starting fires in every hearth. Her hands cracked and bled from the lye soap. She ate the scraps left over after the family finished their meals. Sometimes that meant bread crusts and cold porridge. Sometimes it meant nothing at all. The merchant's wife watched her constantly. Any mistake brought a slap or a beating with a wooden spoon. Anne learned quickly not to cry. Crying made it worse. She told herself it would get easier, but it did not. The work never stopped. Anne woke at 4 in the morning and worked until 10 or 11 at night. She carried buckets of water up 3 flights of stairs, 50 buckets some days. Her back ached. Her arms burned. The cook sent her to scrub pots with sand and cold water. The metal edges cut her fingers. In the main hall, she knelt on stone floors to scrub away mud and soot. Her knees turned purple with bruises. Laundry day was the worst. She soaked linens in giant wooden tubs, pounding them with a beetle. A heavy wooden club used to beat dirt from fabric. The lye in the soap ate at her skin. Her hands became raw and swollen. She rinsed everything in the river, which meant more carrying, more lifting. The wool merchant's wife demanded perfection. Sheets had to be white, floors had to shine. If Anne missed a spot, the punishment was swift. A slap, a shove. Once, the wife grabbed Anne by the hair and dragged her to the fireplace to show her ass she had missed. Anne was 12 years old. She weighed less than 80 pounds. She was exhausted every single moment of every single day, and this was only the beginning. No one spoke to her with kindness. The other servants saw her as competition for food and space. The merchant ignored her entirely unless she made a mistake. His wife treated her like an animal. Anne had no friends, no family, no one to tell her troubles to. She thought often of her mother. She wondered if this life was worth living. At night, she lay in the dark and listened to the other girls breathe. Sometimes one of them cried quietly. No one comforted anyone. Comfort was a luxury they could not afford. Anne began to feel hollow inside. The work crushed her body, but the loneliness crushed her spirit. She started to forget what it felt like to smile. She forgot the sound of her mother's voice. She became a shadow, a thing that moved through the house doing tasks. She was not a person anymore. She was a tool, and tools did not need to feel anything. You might wonder how any child survived this. You might ask yourself if people back then even saw this as wrong. They did not. This was normal, expected. Poor girls had no future except service, and service meant suffering. But how much suffering could one person endure before something inside them broke? Anne was 13 when she saw another servant die. The girl's name was Mary. She had been coughing for weeks. Blood came up eventually. No one called a doctor. Doctors cost money. Mary worked until she collapsed in the kitchen. The cook dragged her to the attic and left her there, and sat with her that night. Mary's skin burned with fever. She shook violently. She whispered for her mother. By morning she was dead. The merchant had her body removed and replaced her with another girl within 2 days. No funeral, no mourning. No acknowledgement that a 14-year-old child had just died in his house, and helped carry Mary's body down the stairs. It was light. Mary had weighed almost nothing. That night, Anne slept in the same bed where Mary had died. The straw still smelled like sickness. Anne did not cry. She had no tears left. But here is the twist. Anne was not even the most unfortunate. Across London, thousands of girls worked in even worse conditions. Some were sent to workhouses where they sewed until their fingers bled and their eyesight failed. Others were sold to brothels, where they were used and discarded by men who faced no consequences. Some became wet nurses, forced to breastfeed the children of wealthy families while their own babies starved. The worst fate of all belonged to the girls sent to the American colonies. They were shipped overseas as indentured servants. The voyage took months. Many died on the ships from disease or starvation. Those who survived were sold like cattle to plantation owners. They worked in fields under brutal heat. If they tried to escape, they were hunted down and beaten. If they became pregnant, they were blamed and punished. No one protected them. No one cared. And the law said this was perfectly acceptable. Think about that. Think about a society that saw young girls as disposable. A society that worked them to death and replaced them without a second thought. How is it that so many people accepted this as normal? What would you have done if you had been born into that world? Most girls like Anne did not last long. The body can only take so much. Constant hunger weakens bones. Overwork damages muscles and joints. Disease spreads fast in filthy conditions. By the time a servant reached her 20s, she often looked 40. Teeth rotted, hair thinned. Skin became sallow and gray. Many developed chronic coughs from breathing in smoke and dust. Others suffered from infections that never fully healed. The psychological damage was just as severe. Anxiety, depression, a sense of worthlessness that never went away. Some girls gave up entirely. They stopped trying. They moved through their tasks like ghosts. Others became angry and bitter. A few tried to run, but running meant being caught and punished. And punishment in the 1600s was brutal: public whipping, branding, imprisonment. There was no escape. Most girls simply endured until their bodies gave out. Anne turned 16 in the winter of 1623. She had been working in the merchant's house for 6 years. Her hands were scarred. Her back was bent. She coughed often. One morning she woke and could not get out of bed. Her legs would not move. The pain in her chest was too much. The cook found her and told the merchant's wife. The wife looked at Anne with disgust. She ordered the other servants to move Anne to the attic. No doctor came. Anne lay there for 3 days. She drank a little water. She could not eat. On the 4th day she died. She was 16 years old. The merchant hired a new girl the next week. Anne's story was not unique. It was the reality for countless young women in the 1600s. Society needed servants. It needed workers. It needed people willing to do the hardest, dirtiest, most dangerous jobs. And it found those people among the poorest and most vulnerable. Girls like Anne built the wealth of families they would never be part of. They cleaned the houses they would never own. They cooked the food they would barely taste. And when they died, they were forgotten. The system did not care about them. It only cared about what they could produce. And when they could no longer produce, they were replaced. This was how the world worked. This was the cost of progress. Someone always had to pay. And in the 1600s, it was young women like Anne who paid with their lives. We live in a world built on the suffering of people we will never know. The floors we walk on, the food we eat, the comfort we take for granted, it all came at a cost, and that cost was human. So the next time you think about history, remember Anne. Remember the girl who died at 16 after a lifetime of pain. Remember that she was real. And remember that there were millions more just like her. History is not romantic. It is not a fairy tale. It is blood and sweat and silent suffering. And somewhere in some corner of the world that suffering continues.